My name is Leland Graves. I'm 30 years old, and I restore old wood furniture for a living. The kind of work where you spend 6 hours sanding a single tabletop, and somehow it still feels like the fastest 6 hours of your week. I grew up in Atlanta, and for a while I had a different life there. A wife named Shayla, an apartment in Midtown with a view I never actually looked at. Plans that sounded reasonable on paper, back when I still believed paper meant something. That life ended almost 2.5 years ago. Shayla wanted out, and I didn't fight her on it. Some things, you just let go the way they're leaving. During the divorce, she filed a protective order against me. I want to say that plainly, right at the start, because I've learned that hiding a thing only gives it more weight than it deserves. I never raised a hand to her, or to anyone. The court dismissed the order after 60 days. No findings, no basis, the petition withdrawn by the person who filed it. But a dismissed filing doesn't disappear from a public record. It just sits there, quiet, waiting for somebody to go looking for it. I left Atlanta about 2 years ago and drove to Memphis without much of a plan beyond distance. I bought a run-down craftsman bungalow on Avalon Street, sloped roof, a porch that had started to rot through in 2 places, oak floors buried under 3 layers of somebody else's bad paint choices. I fixed it myself, one board at a time, over months instead of weeks. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd learned, the hard way, that hurrying was usually how I lost things in the first place. I picked up restoration work for a few antique shops around Midtown Memphis and some private clients who found me through word of mouth. Nothing that made me rich, but enough to keep the lights on and my hands occupied from sunup until whenever the light in the garage went bad. I got used to the sound of a hand plane pulling across grain more than I got used to the sound of people talking. That suited me fine. For a little over a year, that was my whole rhythm. Wood, sandpaper, quiet mornings that asked nothing of me, quiet nights that gave nothing back, which, at the time, felt like a fair trade. I wasn't looking for anything, back then. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for what came later. I wasn't sitting on that porch every evening hoping the right person would move in next door. I'd more or less made peace with the idea that I'd live out my 30s fixing other people's furniture and calling it a life, and there were stretches where that felt like enough. It wasn't self-pity. It was just where I was standing, honestly, on the day that U-Haul pulled up. Then, 9 months ago, Noelle moved in next door. It was a Saturday afternoon in October, still warm enough that the sweat hadn't left anybody's collar, and she pulled up in a rented U-Haul, alone. Nobody came to help her carry anything. I was in the garage with the door up, halfway through the leg of a chair, and I watched her wrestling with a cardboard box that looked heavier than she was, her arms shaking a little under the weight of it. I didn't say anything. I put the chair leg down, walked over, carried 4 boxes onto her porch, and went back to my own house without waiting for a conversation to start. Before I went inside, I left a mason jar of cold water on her top step, the same jars I use in the workshop for nails and screws when I run out of the little tin cans. Tin lid, filtered water, no ice because ice melts, and I figured she had enough melting to deal with that day. I didn't knock. I didn't wait around for a thank you. That's not really how I operate. She didn't see me leave it, but I saw her, through my shop window, pick the jar up off the step, drink the whole thing down in one go, set it back on the rail, and look over toward my house like she already suspected where it had come from. I stepped back from the window before her eyes got there. Some things don't need to be witnessed to matter. For the next 8 months, whatever was building between us built itself entirely out of small, quiet gestures, the kind of language you don't actually need words for, if you're patient enough to let it speak. Noelle sent that same mason jar back to me a few days later, with a sprig of wildflower she must have picked from the fence line stuck down inside it. She left it on my porch railing without knocking, same as I had done for her. I remember standing there holding it, turning it over once in my hands, thinking that she understood exactly the kind of conversation I was trying to have with her, the kind that doesn't need a single sentence to make its point. After that, a rhythm formed between our 2 houses, the way rhythms do when nobody's forcing them. I fixed the hinge on her side gate one afternoon while she was still at work. Nobody asked me to. I just noticed it hanging crooked on my way past, and happened to have a wrench in my back pocket. She started leaving a tray of brownies on my porch every Sunday evening, always around 6, always still warm enough that I could smell them through the screen door before I even opened it. We'd wave to each other across the yard, Trade a few sentences about the weather or the wine of my table saw, or the stray orange cat that liked to sit on her fence post like it owned the block. Never more than 5 minutes. Never less than warm. I learned things about her the way you learn things about a neighbor, which is to say by watching, not by asking. She worked as a paralegal, left the house at 7:30 every morning in the same gray blazer, came home around 6, and locked her door twice. Always twice. A habit I clocked without thinking much of it at the time. Her hair was usually down, dark brown, pulled back only on the hottest afternoons. She never invited anyone inside. Not the mail carrier, not the 2 women from the end of the block who came around with a casserole the week she moved in. Nobody. I recognized something in that, because I lived the exact same way. Not out of habit for its own sake, but because I'd been careless once, and I'd paid a price for it I wasn't in a hurry to pay again. 5 months ago, the bulb on her porch light burned out. I replaced it one afternoon while she was at work, the same warm yellow kind I use on my own porch, because matching bulbs felt like a small kindness that wouldn't cost either of us anything. That night, I was sitting in my workshop with the overhead lights off, just the desk lamp on over a drawer I was sanding, and I saw her through the gap in my curtain, standing in her screen doorway, looking up at the new bulb like she was doing the math. Then she looked over at my house. She didn't ask who did it. She just smiled, the particular kind of smile that belongs to somebody who already knows the answer and has decided, for now, not to say it out loud. I'm telling you this part the way I understand it now, from where I'm standing, not the way I understood it then. Because what I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out for months and months, was that 3 weeks before that porch light ever burned out, Noelle had already run a background check on me. She had access to public court records through her job, and she told me later that it was simply a habit for her, one she'd picked up honestly. A woman living alone next to a stranger gets careful about who that stranger actually is. She pulled up my name on a slow afternoon at the office and found both documents waiting for her. The protective order Shayla had filed against me, and, right behind it in the record, the dismissal that followed, the court's own language stapled to the back of it, no factual basis found, petition withdrawn by the filing party. She read every page of it, and then, knowing exactly what she now knew, she decided to trust me anyway. I didn't know any of that at the time. I want you to sit with that for just a second, because it matters for everything that happens later in this story. She already knew the worst thing a stranger could dig up about me, and she still left wildflowers in a jar on my porch railing. She still waved at me over the fence line like nothing was weighing on her. She still smiled at a porch light bulb like it meant something real, all while carrying a piece of the truth she hadn't handed me yet, and wouldn't, for a long while. About 4 months ago, Noelle started getting messages from an old number she never once mentioned to me. I only pieced this part together afterward, the way you reconstruct a fire from what's left standing. But I noticed the small changes as they happened, even if I couldn't name what was causing them. She started locking her door earlier in the evening, sometimes before it was even fully dark. Her porch light stayed on all night, instead of clicking off around 10 like it used to. Sometimes she'd glance up and down Avalon Street before she opened her own front door, like she was checking for something specific, something with a face she already knew. Then the heat wave rolled into Memphis and simply refused to leave. Day after day of triple digits, the kind of heat that makes the whole city move slower, talk less, sweat through their shirts before 9 in the morning, and just accept it. On the 4th day of it, Noelle got a text. I didn't know about this at the time either. She told me all of it, word for word, weeks later, sitting on my porch step. It said, "I'll be in Memphis this weekend. We need to talk." She didn't answer it. She told me her hands were shaking when she locked the screen. She sat down right there on her kitchen floor, tile cold against the backs of her legs even in that heat, and stayed there for a while longer than she meant to. I only found out what happened next because it happened at my door. At 11:47 that night, she knocked. White sundress, hair pulled up off her neck, 2 mason jars of sweet tea sweating in her hands, condensation running down over her fingers and dripping onto my welcome mat. She asked me to come swim with her in the inflatable pool she'd set up in her backyard sometime that summer, one I hadn't even noticed until that exact moment. The pool itself was nothing fancy. A round plastic ring pool from a big box store, filled halfway with a garden hose, sitting on grass that had gone crisp and pale from 3 straight weeks of no rain. She sat down on the edge with her feet in the water, ankles just under the surface. I climbed in up to my chest, the water lukewarm from sitting in the heat all day, but still cooler than the air around us. We talked about Memphis, about the heat that wouldn't quit, about the crickets going off somewhere past the fence line, about what it actually means to live alone, whether that's a choice or something that just happens to a person. Nobody asked a question that cut too deep that night, but every sentence between us felt like a door opening a little wider than the one before it. She never got in the water. She never brought a swimsuit at all, not even folded up in a bag by the back door. She just sat there with her feet in the pool, a jar of sweet tea sweating in her hand, and talked to me until 3 o'clock in the morning, long after the crickets had gone quiet too. At the time, I thought she just couldn't sleep because of the heat. I was wrong about that, in a way I wouldn't understand for weeks. For 2 weeks after that night by the pool, something between us shifted, quietly but completely, the way a house settles after you finally fix the foundation nobody thought was a problem. Noelle started bringing coffee over to my porch every morning before she left for work. Not in a paper cup, in a mason jar, because by then that had quietly become our thing without either one of us ever naming it out loud. I fixed the bookshelf in her living room that had been leaning for who knows how long, replaced a stuck hinge on her kitchen cabinet that stuck every single time she reached for a plate. We started sitting on the porch together most evenings after dinner, not saying a whole lot, but the distance between our 2 chairs got a little smaller every single night, an inch here, an inch there, until neither of us could say exactly when it had closed. I never once went inside her house after 8 o'clock. She never once reached for my hand. But we both knew something was forming between us, the same slow way soaked oak changes shape under pressure, gradual, patient, but not something that reverses itself once it's set. I want to be honest about something, because this whole story only makes sense if I am. There were moments in those 2 weeks when I almost said something to her, almost told her flat out that I didn't just like having her on my porch. I looked forward to it the way you look forward to weather changing after a long stretch of the same gray sky. But I held it back every time. Some habit in me still believed that saying a thing out loud was how you jinxed it, how you turned something good into something that could be used against you later. I'd learned that lesson once already, and I wasn't in a hurry to learn it twice. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, I heard a man's voice carrying from somewhere near Noelle's front door. Loud, impatient, the kind of voice that's used to getting exactly what it wants and doesn't understand what it feels like to be told no. I looked out through the open garage door and saw a black SUV parked crooked in front of her house, and a tall man standing at her door in a fitted polo shirt, his hair gelled back, carrying himself like a man who still believed he had some claim on something that wasn't his anymore. I didn't know his name yet. Bryce Maitland. I just watched Noelle open the door partway, take a step back into her own foyer, and say something to him I couldn't quite make out from that distance. He stepped forward, right into the doorway she'd been trying to hold. She stepped back again, further this time. I walked out onto my own porch. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, wiping wood oil off my hands with a shop rag, watching. Then he grabbed her wrist. I saw her flinch, saw her try to pull it free and not quite manage it on the first attempt. I crossed the gravel path between our 2 houses. 10 steps. I've counted them more than once since. And when I finally spoke, my voice came out low, not raised, not shouting, just certain. Let go of her. He turned and looked at me, sizing me up the way men like that always do, deciding in about a second and a half whether I was worth the trouble. Then he let go of her wrist, and smiled the kind of smile that belongs to someone who's used to winning arguments just by staying calm and letting everyone else look unreasonable. Who are you? I didn't answer him. I just stood there, steady, until he backed off toward his car, still smiling like none of it had cost him anything. Before he shut the driver's door, he looked at me one more time and said, "I'll be back." He didn't come back in person, not for a while. He came back through a screen instead, which turned out to be worse. 10 days later, a post showed up in the Avalon Street neighborhood group on Facebook. A screenshot of the court filing, my name printed in bold, the protective order clearly visible, no mention anywhere in the caption of the dismissal that followed right behind it in the same public record. The caption underneath read, "Ladies, you should know who your neighbors really are." 32 shares in 12 hours. I didn't even know that group existed until that afternoon. That same day, he sent Noelle the identical screenshot directly, with one line underneath it. "Do you trust this guy?" I found out about the post because Marge called me. She's 72 years old, lives at the top of the block, and has known me since the week I first moved onto Avalon Street. Leland, honey, you should see what's going around online right now. I read the whole thing standing in my workshop, sawdust still clinging to my knuckles, my phone screen the only bright thing in the room. I didn't comment on it. I didn't call anyone to explain myself. I didn't walk over to Noelle's porch and knock, even though every part of me wanted to. She disappeared instead. No coffee in the mornings. No brownies that Sunday. No footsteps on her porch at all. Not even the sound of her door opening and closing the way it usually did a dozen times a day. Her porch light stayed on through the night, but the screen door stayed shut, and it stayed that way for a full week. I kept looking at the mason jar sitting on my workshop windowsill, the one with the wildflower in it. Months old by then, empty now, a thin gray film of dust settled along the inside of the glass. I didn't refill it. I didn't wash it out. I just let it sit there empty, because it felt honest to leave it that way. I went about my days like normal, because that's what you do. You sand a tabletop, you deliver a chair, you nod at the guy who runs the antique shop on Cooper Street when he tells you the client loved the finish. But every evening, right around 6, I'd catch myself glancing over at her porch out of habit, the same way you keep checking a clock for a train you already know isn't coming. I told myself I understood why she'd gone quiet. A man had grabbed her wrist on her own front step, and 10 days later half the neighborhood was reading about my past like it was the only chapter of me that existed. If I'd been in her position, maybe I'd have gone quiet too. Understanding it didn't make the week feel any shorter. I remember thinking, standing in that quiet workshop with the fan still running, that this was the second time in my life I'd lost someone I cared about because of a single piece of paper neither one of us had written the whole truth onto. The first time, I told myself I hadn't seen it coming. This time, I watched it happen in slow motion, one silent evening at a time, and there wasn't a single thing I knew how to do about it except wait. 10 days after that post went up, I was sitting on my porch late at night with the light switched off. The first time I'd turned it off in months, mostly because I didn't much feel like being seen. I heard footsteps coming up the gravel path. Noelle stood at the bottom of my steps, holding not a mason jar this time, not a tray of brownies, but a printed stack of paper, stapled once in the corner, edges already a little curled from being carried around. "I need you to read this," she said, and her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't steady either. I reached over and turned the porch light back on. She climbed the first 2 steps and handed the stack over. The first page was the protective order. I knew it by heart at that point, every clause of it, the way you know a scar without needing to look at it. The second page was the dismissal, the court's red stamp still crisp even in a photocopy, the date printed clearly along the top margin. The next 3 pages were the court's own notes, typed out in plain language. No factual basis found. Petition withdrawn by filing party. "I read this 3 months ago," she said, standing there in the porch light. "I'm a paralegal, Leland. I run background checks on people who live around me. It's a habit I picked up honestly, out of a relationship that made habits like that feel necessary rather than paranoid." I sat there for a second, letting that land. 3 months. That covered the porch light. The bookshelf hinge I fixed without being asked. All those evenings where I'd assumed we were just 2 careful people slowly getting less careful around each other, one Sunday brownie at a time. The whole time, she'd known exactly what she was walking toward. "You've known since 3 months ago," I said, and it wasn't really a question. "I knew before I ever changed your porch light bulb." She meant hers, before I'd changed the bulb on her porch, back when I thought that was a secret I was keeping well. She sat down on the step below mine without being asked, close enough now that I could hear her breathing settle. And then she told me what had actually happened that night by the pool, the whole thing, start to finish. That afternoon, the 4th day of the heat wave, Bryce had texted her, "I'll be in Memphis this weekend. We need to talk." She'd locked her phone, sat down on her kitchen floor, and felt the whole house shrinking around her, the walls somehow closer than they'd been an hour before. She needed to leave it, but not by walking out into the street alone. She needed to be near somebody she actually trusted, somebody whose presence made the shrinking stop. "I didn't come over because of the heat," she said, looking down at her hands instead of at me. "I didn't bring a swimsuit because I didn't need a pool. I needed to sit next to someone who made the house stop feeling small around me." She paused for a long moment, long enough that a car passed somewhere down the street before she picked the thread back up. And I've had feelings for you since the day you left that jar of water on my porch step. 9 months, Leland. That's how long I've been carrying this around. I didn't say much back to her. Not because I didn't feel it, every word of it landing exactly where it was aimed, but because I'd spent a long time learning that my words could get twisted into something they were never meant to be. So instead, I stood up, went inside without a sound, and came back out holding that same mason jar from the windowsill. Empty, dusty, months old by then. I filled it from the pitcher in my kitchen and set it down on the step between us, right where the porch light caught the water. I'm not real good with words, I told her, and I meant every syllable of it. But this jar's never really been empty. Not the way it looked. She looked down at the water for a while, then up at me. Neither one of us reached for the other. Neither one of us needed to. Not yet. Not that night. We sat on that porch together until the sky over Avalon Street started to lighten at the edges. We didn't say a whole lot more after that. Honestly, there wasn't much left that needed saying, not that night. Somewhere around 4, she leaned her head back against the porch post and closed her eyes for a minute, not sleeping, just resting, and I let the quiet sit there between us without trying to fill it with anything. That felt like its own kind of answer. I thought about Shayla for a second, sitting there, and I want to be honest about that too. Not with any bitterness. That had mostly burned off somewhere on the drive from Atlanta to Memphis 2 years earlier. Just a quiet kind of recognition. The way you notice a scar has finally stopped aching when you press on it. I'd spent 2 years assuming that the worst thing about me would always be the first thing anybody found, that it would always arrive before I did and decide things on my behalf. Noelle had found it first, read every line of it, and stayed anyway, and somehow that fact alone did more to settle me than 2 years of trying to convince myself I was fine on my own. I looked over at her, half asleep against the porch post, and I thought about how strange it was that the thing I'd spent 2 years trying to outrun had actually been sitting right there the whole time, waiting for somebody who wouldn't flinch at it. I hadn't outrun it at all. I'd just been waiting for the right person to read it and stay. When Noelle finally stood up to head home, right as the birds were starting up somewhere down the block, she took the jar with her, full, not empty. And somehow, without either of us saying it out loud, I already knew she'd bring it back. Marge was the one who actually got the post taken down, in the end. She commented the dismissal directly underneath Bryce's screenshot with a note that read, "I've known this young man for 2 years. Read the whole thing before you open your mouth about him." The 32 shares dropped down to 4 within a single day, and by the end of that week the post had been removed from the group entirely, like it had never been there at all. Noelle emailed the group's admin herself, attaching the full record and formally requesting the post's removal on the grounds that it was defamatory. She wrote it plainly, the way you'd expect a paralegal to write it. "I'm a paralegal. This qualifies as defamation per se under Tennessee law." Bryce never came back around Avalon Street after that, not once. A month later, Noelle was granted a formal restraining order. Every one of those messages she'd been saving for 4 months, every screenshot, every unanswered text, became the exact evidence that made it possible. Paralegal habits, she told me afterward, with the first real, easy laugh I'd heard out of her in weeks. After that, we stopped being quite so careful with each other in the way we used to be. Dinners moved from the porch railing into the kitchen table. She learned to tell oak from walnut just by smell, standing in my workshop in her socks with sawdust collecting around her feet. I learned the particular way she reads, round wire-rimmed glasses, legs folded underneath her in the armchair, an old grocery receipt used as a bookmark because she could never remember to buy a real one. Our first kiss didn't happen on the porch, the way you'd probably expect. It happened in the workshop instead, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when she handed me an iced coffee in a mason jar and I reached for it with sawdust still stuck to my knuckles, and she didn't seem to mind that at all. She never once asked me to retell the whole story about Shayla, start to finish. She'd already read the record for herself. She already knew the true part of it, the part that mattered most. Whatever else there was to tell, whatever the record couldn't say, she let me hand it to her in my own time, at my own pace. I don't think I'd ever met anyone before her who gave me that kind of room to just be slow about something. There was an evening, maybe 2 months into all of it, when I finally told her the rest anyway, not because she asked, but because I wanted to. We were sitting at the kitchen table with the dishes still out, and I told her about the apartment in Midtown, about how quiet things had gotten between Shayla and me long before the paperwork ever started, about how I'd spent that last year working later and later just to avoid coming home to a silence that had nothing left in it. Noelle didn't say much while I talked. She just reached over at one point and put her hand flat on top of mine on the table and left it there until I was done. That was the whole response, and it was exactly enough. It's October now, 14 months since that first night by the pool. The bungalow's finished, finally. Oak floors sanded down and sealed, a new porch built board by board. The walls painted a soft gray-white that catches the morning light just right. Noelle moved in properly a few months back. No rented U-Haul this time. Just a handful of boxes carried across the same 10 steps of gravel that sit between our two houses. She kept her old place for another 2 months after that, just in case she needed the space to breathe. She never once needed it. I opened my own restoration shop out of the garage not long after. A small hand-carved sign out front that just says Graves Restoration, plain as that, and most of my clients still find their way to me through word of mouth, the same way they always did. Noelle moved over to a bigger firm downtown, working real estate records now instead of the caseload she used to carry, closer to home, steadier hours than before. Every single morning, a mason jar of coffee shows up out on the porch, and nobody ever says out loud whose turn it was to make it. If I'm up first, mine's the one waiting for her. If she's up first, hers is the one waiting for me. We've never once asked each other how it works. We've never once needed to. Marge still calls me honey every time she sees me at the mailbox, and she takes a certain amount of credit for the whole thing now, which I let her have, because honestly she's earned it. She tells anybody who'll listen that she knew something was going on between the two of us long before either of us admitted it. She says she saw it in the way I used to linger on my own porch a little too long some evenings, like I was waiting on something I hadn't named yet. She's probably right. She usually is. Some nights I still think about the version of that summer where I never carried those 4 boxes onto her porch, where I minded my own business the way I'd minded it for a year straight before she showed up. I don't dwell on it long, but it's there, sometimes, right at the edge of things. How close the whole story came to never starting at all, over something as small as a stranger struggling with a box she could have managed on her own, eventually, if nobody had bothered to help. The Facebook post has been gone a long time now, deleted for good, but it left a mark somewhere in the neighborhood that hasn't fully faded. Some people, it turns out, remember the first half of a story a lot longer than they remember the truth that came after it. Once, at the grocery store on Poplar, a woman pulled her son a little closer to her side when she noticed me in the cereal aisle. Noelle was standing right there next to me. She didn't say anything in the moment itself, but once we were back out in the car, pulling out of the lot, she said, "Some people will always believe the first half of a thing. That's not on you, Leland. It never was." Then she pulled out onto Poplar like it was nothing at all. No speech, no drama, no lingering on it. Just one true sentence, said once, and left alone to be what it was. That was the moment I actually understood something, sitting in that passenger seat with the grocery bags between us. It wasn't the moment I realized she loved me. That had already happened, quietly, sometime before. It was the moment I realized I wanted to stay, for good, for all of it, for the parts of this town that still remembered the wrong version of me too. She knocked on my door at 11:47 at night, in the middle of a record heat wave, holding 2 jars of sweet tea, with no swimsuit on her at all. I thought, at the time, that she'd come because of the heat. She'd actually come because she was scared, and because she'd already decided, months before, to trust me before I'd ever given her a single reason to. Some people study you looking for a weakness to use later. Some people study you, find the weakness anyway, and choose to stay standing right next to you regardless. Noelle read the worst thing a stranger could possibly find about me, and then she walked out onto her own porch and left a wildflower sitting in a mason jar like it was nothing at all, like it didn't cost her anything to trust me. I used to believe that fixing up old houses was how I was healing myself. Really, all it ever did was give my hands something honest to do while I waited. Waited for somebody to knock on my door without needing a reason first. She didn't bring a swimsuit that night. She brought something a lot heavier than that, something I didn't even know I'd been missing until she set it down in front of me. She brought trust, the kind that doesn't ask to be earned first. Have you ever found out that someone already knew the worst part of your story and stayed anyway, without making you explain yourself? And if you were in my shoes that night, would you have opened that door at midnight? If this one got to you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story like it. And if you've got an answer to either one of those questions, leave it down in the comments. I read every single one.